finance borrowing binge will hurt Guyana, says former finance minister Winston Jordan. Raises red flag over technocrat signing loan request to China. Former Finance Minister Winston Jordan has expressed grave concerns over Guyana's borrowing spree, and he also questioned the legality of a letter sent to the Chinese ambassador regarding a loan request of $1.5 billion, which he said was signed by a finance ministry official instead of the subject minister, who, according to Section 58.1 of the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act 2003 F.M.A., has the sole authority to borrow on behalf of the government of Guyana. In a letter to the editor of this newspaper, Jordan said that he had begun to hear rumors, around March, about the government's approach to China for loans, totaling $1.5 billion to finance various infrastructure projects. Former Finance Minister Winston Jordan said, "What I found to be astonishing was that the letter to the Chinese ambassador, requesting the loan, was signed by a senior official of the Ministry of Finance, and copied to the President, Vice President, the senior minister, in the Office of the President, with responsibility for finance, among others." Section 58.1 of the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act 2003 FMAA reposes in the Minister of Finance the sole authority to borrow on behalf of the government of Guyana, Jordan said. At a news conference last week, Vice President Bharat Jagdeo confirmed his government's approach to the Chinese for the $1.5 billion loan. When questioned, he said, "We made it clear to everyone. No financing from anybody comes with political strings, but Chinese financing has been readily available to the world. And we believe, like the rest of the region, we have to explore friends and partners from every part of the world." Jagdeo also spoke about the government trying to access €103 million from Austria for the construction of a children and maternal hospital, but Guyana would have had to deduct €13 million immediately as an upfront fee, and repay that along with the requirement to use one of their pre-approved contractors. He said, India and the United States stipulate that contractors from those countries be used. Meanwhile, Jordan said that the 2021 mid-year report records the stock of public debt as $2.905 billion. This, he said, can easily rise to $5.3 billion within a few years if one were to factor in the $1.5 billion from China and the undrawn $9 billion from the Islamic Development Bank. It becomes even starker when one considers the borrowing overdraft of the Consolidated Fund, borrowing from traditional sources, such as World Bank, IDB, and CDB, and new sources of borrowing, such as the sovereign wealth funds of the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. All of this borrowing is taking place, ostensibly, to fulfill manifesto promises, regardless of how implausible many of them appear to be. Jordan said, the repayment of these loans is premised on future oil receipts coming to the government. In this regard, however, the experience of Ghana is most instructive, and the government should avail itself of the lessons learned. Jordan said too, that borrowing, at a concessionary rate, as low as 2%, although it makes sense, will only work, providing that the projects being financed guarantee a return greater than the cost of borrowing. Since monies are accumulating in the Natural Resource Fund, the NRF, then it makes sense to finance a project by borrowing at 2% once the returns on the NRF's funds are greater than 2%. But here is a reality check. First, the funds in the NRF are earning almost zero return because the government refuses to activate the investment committee among the other committees of the NRF. Jordan said. He said too that it is unlikely that the $1.5 billion loan from China can be secured at an interest rate of 2%. I say this based on previous attempts by a PPP/C government to secure funding from China for the Amela Falls hydropower project. AFHP, a major sticking point during the negotiations was the interest rates on the two major loans that were to be provided by the two Chinese funding institutions. These interest rates were far in excess of 2%. Vice President Bharat Jagdeo stated last week that according to the mid-year financial report, disbursements from the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, increased tenfold, from $5.2 million in the first half of 2020, to about $55.5 million for the corresponding period in 2021. According to the report, about 75.2% of the latter amount was allocated to combating the economic and social ramifications of the pandemic. The report was at the time addressing the nation's total debt stock, and explained that the increase was largely due to positive net flows, disbursements less principal repayments, from the IDB, driven by disbursements under 2 loan agreements, geared at combating the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the report, at the end of June 2021, multilateral creditors held 64.2% of external public and publicly guaranteed the PPG debt. Bilateral creditors 33.4%, and private creditors 2.4%. Projecting forward, the report states that the external PPG debt stock is projected to increase by 3.9% from its mid-year position to $1,407.5 million at the end of 2021, mainly driven by disbursements under several IDB-funded projects. Detailing the borrowing, the report reflected that, in the first half of 2021, disbursements from external creditors amounted to $61.6 million, more than 3 times that in the first half of 2020. To this end, it was explained that this increase reflects higher disbursements from multilateral creditors, moving from $10.3 million in the first half of 2020 to $60.8 million in the first half of this year. Meanwhile, as key projects approached completion, the report highlighted that bilateral disbursements totaled $8 million in the first half of the year, 89.1% lower than $7.3 million during the same period in 2020. Meanwhile, as it relates to domestic PPG debt, the report documents that, at the end of the first half of the year, this amounted to $1,552.6 million, a 22.1% increase from the end of 2020 figure of $1,271.4 million. It was noted too that, June 2021, government SEC released the inherited overdraft at the Bank of Guyana, using 85 variable rate debentures, with tenors ranging from 1 to 20 years, totaling $200 billion, about $959.2 million. Consequently, the first half of 2021 ended with the consolidated fund, as well as public deposits, reflecting a positive balance.
Good morning, YouTubers. It looks like if the Guyanese government can't stop borrowing, I think they're going to leverage away the future generations' profits. Because the money that should be going into funds for the country's people, it looks like if they're just borrowing it away. They've borrowed billions from the Chinese. They have borrowed and leveraged to the Kuwaitis and the Arab Emirates. Now I'm reading where Austria is involved. It's not enough that they've borrowed so much from so many countries, that now they're getting new countries involved in this borrowing spree, because it's projected by 2050 so many billions of barrels of oil is going to be taken from offshore drilling. To me, it's foolhardy. It doesn't make economic sense to be borrowing, pretty much spending money you don't have. It's one thing bringing in the Americans, which is Exxon and Mobil, to get the oil from offshore, to start the economy going, and the investments, and putting dollars into the economy. That's one thing. But it's another thing when you are borrowing money for projects that you don't have to borrow money for. They don't have to borrow money to have a lot of these projects that have been projected, such as building hospitals and the Amelia Falls electrical project. They don't need to borrow money because they're going to get the oil money. The oil money has been flowing in. So where is all that money going? Why did they have to get the Chinese in and lease Amelia for 20 years with pretty much no profit? And then it's going to be handed back to the Guyanese government, like the United States did with the Panama Canal, where the United States developed it and used it at its discretion, and then after a certain period of years handed it back to the Panamanian government. Pretty much that's what they're doing with Amelia Falls, with the hydroelectric energy project that the Chinese are now developing. And it's just concerning. That part doesn't concern me as much as the other parts, with the United Arab Emirates in there. They got a little foothold in there. Then you got the Kuwaitis, you got India, Austria, China, the US, that are now coming into the picture, and now they're asking Austria for a loan. It does not make good economic sense, because the money is flowing into the country, and that's the money they can take to use in varying projects and outright pay contractors. If you don't have the money, don't spend. They have done a lot of spending so far with money they don't have. So that's called borrowing, leveraging against what they hope that's going to come out of the oil revenues. But Guyana only have a small percentage of the oil revenues. All that 90 billion barrels that they talk about, it's only a small percentage Guyana has. So when Guyana goes ahead, the government, and borrow, they may find themselves in a deficit at the other end of the stick. So they've got to be very careful not to leverage away future generations' profits, the country's profits. So YouTubers, I hope you guys are keeping track of what's been going on with the oil sector and Guyana's oil revenues and the varying countries that got their hand in the kitty jar. So you guys keep your ears to the ground as to what's going on. Stay blessed, be blessed, and have a blessed day. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel by hitting that red subscribe button before you leave the YouTube page. Don't forget.